Yes, folks, Scott Morrison is about to dump hundreds of refugees onto New Zealand. And of course, he is going to do that with the aid of our dumbo Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Now, as you probably know, he has successfully repealed the Medivac scam that allowed refugees access to Australia via the back door. But now those refugees have to go somewhere, and New Zealand is it. And Morrison is using dirty bait-and-switch tactics to do it. He is promising Australians that he will not allow the boat people trade to start again. But that is exactly what he's going to do. Anyway, today I'll start this off with a couple of clips from a year or so ago to give you a bit of background.
You know, in this place, people can have some short memories. It wasn't that long ago where boats crashed on the rocks and children were dragged up from the sea face down. I remember it. I stopped it with a suite of measures that were necessary together to stop that horror. Temporary protection visas. I had to legislate through the Parliament and Labor tried to stop me, but we passed them. Offshore processing, which they resisted and resisted and resisted, and then put into place, and then we made it work. And turning back boats where it's safe to do so, which everyone told us wasn't possible. But I did it, we did it, and it worked. Labor has already said they want to get rid of temporary protection visas. They think it doesn't matter. Kevin Rudd said the same thing in August of 2008. He got rid of it and the boats came again. Now Labor want to abolish offshore processing as we know it, turn it into a transit lounge.
And now, Mr. Morrison, you are going to do exactly the same when you make a deal with Jacinda Ardern to take 150 refugees a year. You are going to turn Nauru and Manus Island into transit lounges for New Zealand. And you're going to start the boat people trade again. Yeah, so now let's see who started this mess.
It seems belatedly accepting New Zealand's offer to take 150 refugees a year is in play.
They are truly remarkable.
More than 5 years after John Key extended the offer to Julia Gillard.
The offer remains.
Yes, folks, John Key started it. Anyway, now to the present.
But there wasn't much transparency about the government's negotiations with Jackie Lambie to get the Medivac legislation repealed. The crossbench senator indicating she had extracted something.
I'm more than satisfied that the conditions are now in place to allow Medivac to be repealed.
Leading to questions about just what happened behind closed doors.
Deal or no deal?
A deal between the Morrison government and Senator Lambie.
There is no secret deal.
It's understood the government reassured Senator Lambie that a long-standing offer from New Zealand to resettle asylum seekers is likely to proceed.
Yeah, so let's just stop there for a moment and find out what's going on. Yeah, now this is from the Sydney Morning Herald. Mr. Morrison sent a letter after days of negotiations with Senator Lambie over the need for a memorandum of understanding with New Zealand to accept the refugees in line with the country's offer several years ago to take 150 each year. The talks centred on 464 asylum seekers and refugees currently on Nauru and Manus Island, with Senator Lambie seeking a commitment to settle as many as possible in New Zealand after a separate agreement with the United States comes to an end. So folks, we're looking at getting at least 464 asylum seekers and refugees, and more when the boat people trade starts again. Now back to Morrison.
I've always been very aware of the New Zealand government's offer.
Senator Lambie remains tight-lipped.
But when I say I can't discuss it publicly due to national security concerns, I am being 100% honest to you.
If the government were to take up the offer from across the ditch, it would likely revisit a lifetime visa ban to stop anyone who arrived by boat using New Zealand as a backdoor to Australia.
And that bill hasn't, to date, not had the requisite support for it to pass the Parliament.
But the Senate numbers have since changed.
Yeah, so now they can block them from entering Australia from New Zealand.
And the other roadblock, New Zealand's opposition to the harsh measure, has also been removed.
Of course, the way that they choose to place restriction on movement within Australia's borders is something for them.
Yeah, so let's go and see that entire interview.
Focus continues on the Medivac repeal and where to next. Of course, there's been a lot of discussion that Jackie Lambie has secured an arrangement with the government to pursue the New Zealand deal. The government said that's always been on the table. Well, we've got some developments now. Our colleague Jackson Williams has sat down with an exclusive interview with the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in Wellington.
The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has left the door open to accepting New Zealand's long-standing refugee resettlement offer. Just to be clear, this offer does remain on the table?
Oh yes, that has not changed, but as I've said, the ball is obviously in Australia's court.
Has there been any discussion between the two governments in recent days regarding the deal?
No, I have had no discussions at that level, and as I say, as far as I'm concerned...
So you haven't had discussions though, but have any officials had discussions?
As far as I'm concerned, we're still in the same status quo we've been in for some time.
Do you hope, does that annoy you? Do you hope that Australia takes this offer up?
Look, as I've said, the offer was made under a previous government.
Yeah, but surely you don't want the hundreds of refugees, remaining in limbo.
You will have heard me speak multiple times on this. Of course, it's not about what New Zealand hopes or wants. Ultimately, the ball has sat with Australia domestically for quite some time.
You could nonetheless apply more public pressure.
Oh, that just demonstrates to me that you missed a period where there was much debate about this issue some years ago.
Why not bring that debate back? The Morrison government's number one concern with this offer is that it creates a backdoor to Australia as refugees resettled in New Zealand would eventually be free to move to Australia. Is there anything New Zealand could do at this end to address that?
My view is that continues to be a matter for Australia. Of course, the way that they choose to place restriction on movement within Australia's borders is something for them, not for New Zealand.
But wouldn't it create a tier of second-class citizens in New Zealand if there's this cohort of refugees who are essentially banned from travelling across the Tasman?
And again, if that were a scenario that were created, it would be created by Australia and ultimately would be within their own domestic policy if they chose to do that.
You would be comfortable with such an arrangement?
It would be a matter for them.
But you'd be comfortable with it, just to be clear?
Oh, of course we would want to maintain as much consistency as we're able to in the treatment of New Zealand citizens, but it is a domestic issue in the same way that I, of course, cannot tell Australia to stop deporting those who have no connection to New Zealand. I will express a view on it, but it is still a matter for them.
Just on that, if Australia accepted the offer, would you want something in return, such as Australia, to stop deporting criminals?
That is not how we operate our relationship. And
God, what is the idiot smiling about? She is so creepy.
Those who have been, of course, covering us for some time will know that that's just not the way New Zealand and Australia work. We have a good, robust, strong relationship, the closest you'll find of any two nations in the world.
That Australia seeks to take advantage of.
Oh, well, that closeness means that we will speak very frankly with our friends when there are policies that we disagree with.
Jacinda Ardern confirming there to Jackson Williams that the offer, the refugee offer, 150 refugees per year, is still on the table. The status quo remains, she says. And interestingly there as well, in relation to the prospect of a second-class New Zealand citizen, she says that's not something of her government's making. If that were to eventuate, it would be Australian domestic policy. But from the sounds of that interview there, it would not preclude that refugee deal being taken up. And under this arrangement that we believe that the government has agreed to with Jackie Lambie, that is to pursue that New Zealand arrangement. But the government's only ever said they'll do that if they can stop a backdoor entry to Australia, i.e. they can block those refugees from ever coming to Australia. Well, from what the Prime Minister Ardern said there, she says that's a matter for domestic politics in Australia. It's not something of her concern, which is interesting. It seems like there is very much a window there for this deal to be done.
Exactly. Yes, folks, it's clear to me that Morrison will make a deal with Jacinda Ardern to transfer Australia's problem onto us. You've just got to connect the dots. He made a deal with Jackie Lambie to get the Medivac scam repealed at New Zealand's expense. So we are going to see at least 464 refugees arrive on our shores over the coming years, and probably more when the boat people trade starts again.